to me it's almost mind-boggling, the number of people who watch these drashas. But I do want to say that for us here and for everyone who's going to watch this, it's impossible to do justice to this subject with a drasha like this for an hour and a quarter, just to talk about it as if we're going to cover the whole thing. In fact, I'm fully aware that many people will leave even today this drasha feeling that I did not really discuss their situation, the uniqueness of their struggles with the siblings, based on the age, the gender, the traumas, the culture, the background, the community, the environment you live in, how far and deeply you're aware of how to do crisis chinuch, or whether you're a novice struggling with how to learn it. There are simply too many variables that could possibly be discussed. And therefore, this drasha is about concepts. There will be a couple of, I hope, directives, advice, guidance for what we should and shouldn't be doing. But please, if we could all just understand, it's not within the format of this drasha to cover everything. It's not shaykh. It's too big. I work with families for months and years as we fine-tune their ever-changing circumstance with their children and with the siblings. So it's not shaykh to capture it. What I'm going to try to do is give some concepts that I hope will be both a marpel and nefesh for us to understand where we're holding with this as we watch the siblings struggle, and also a little guidance. There's probably no bigger criticism that we've received, I've received, and others about these kind of approaches, the crisis chinuch approach. There's probably no bigger criticism than the criticism of what are you doing to the siblings? Look how you're hurting the family. As parents write to me emails and letters and WhatsApps and phone calls, and Rabbanim call me feeling that without, may I say, understanding the shleimus of the sugya fully, it looks like we're damaging the family. We're hurting the other kids. We're exposing and influencing children to all sorts of stuff that they would not have been exposed to or influenced by. And it looks irresponsible. That's the subject I want to address. Recently, someone sent me a long email critiquing the whole approach from the principle in halacha, in the Gemara, as paskened in Shulchan Aruch, the inyan of ein doichen nefesh mipnei nefesh. You don't push away one neshama because of another one. You don't kill one person because of another person. The Gemara gives a couple of cases of this concept. This person, in a certain way, felt and accused this approach of being over on this ein doichen nefesh b'nei nefesh. We are hurting other kids by allowing crisis chinuch in the home. How can we do it? So the Gemara gives a few cases, actually, 3 cases. I'm going to mention 2 in order to extract a principle which, in my conversations with Gedolei HaPoskim and Gedolei Yisrael over the years, I've heard confirmation of the ruach of what I'm about to say. And I share it with you in that context. So the Gemara gives 2 cases. One is of an Isha, Shemakasha Leiled. She's having a hard time giving birth. She's pregnant. And the baby is paskened by the doctors, the mumchim, that if the pregnancy will continue, she will die. What do we do? So there's a principle, ein doichen nefesh mipnei nefesh. and we abort the child, because the child is considered like a roidif. We abort the child to save the mother's life. Similarly, there's a Gemara talks about if the Goyim come and they take 10 people are standing there and they say, give us one of those people, we're going to kill someone. Give us one to kill. They're not allowed to give. But if they name the person and say that person, you're allowed to give. And the principle is, ein doichen nefesh b'nei nefesh. We don't push away one nefesh because of another. And they implied that here we're trying to save this child's life. Here we're hurting other kids. We're destroying other children. That's what it looks like to them. So the Gemara says something interesting. That if the baby has been partially delivered and its head is already emerged, then we leave it alone. Even if there's a suffix the mother may die, we leave it alone. And the principle the Gemara says is midishmei, from Shemayim, karot filah. The danger to her is happening min Shemayim. It's not us doing anything. We're leaving, it's just min Shemayim. Mishmei karot filah. It's happening min Shemayim, and we leave it alone, and whatever happens, happens. And what I heard in the Ruach of the Chachamim and the Paskim is by the time one of our children, unfortunately, exhibits the struggles where they themselves appear to be in a sofib kuch nefesh, and we have no choice but to do crisis chinuch to save their life, then the impact they have is mishmaya karat filah. That's min Shemayim. This is mi'ikar hashkafa in this sugya. And it's profoundly important. I've heard this approach given over, that once the child is already struggling, we have a chiyuv to save him. He's a vadai, or she's in a vadai matzav. Sounds odd. A vadai matzav of sofib kuch nefesh. She's in a sofib kuch nefesh, or he is. Whereas the others are not. And whatever impact happens, mishmaya karat filah. Das min Shemayim. It's not something we're doing. This concept is a concept that we have to stay with us for ourselves as we go through this sugya and understand it. And I will explain it a little deeper. There are two clips I want to show to give a framework. One of them most of us have seen. Perhaps the second one you will have seen too. And I want to be masbir something a little different out of these clips, even if we've seen them already. They're short. And I want to explain something from them. The first one is very familiar to all of us, I think. Perhaps even the second one.
איך עוזרים לדור הזה, איך עוזרים להורים להבין את הילדים, זה העיקר העניין, להורים. סיפרה לי שבאה אליה אישה לפני כמה שנים עם 8 ילדים, ואחת הבת ירדה בדרך ועושה לה את המוות, והיא לא יודעת איך לטפל בה. ומה עם הילדים האחרים? לזרוק אותה בבית, לא לזרוק אותה בבית, לא יודעת מה לעשות. אמרה הרבנית הזאת, בואי נלך לרב אלישיב ונשאל מה הוא אומר. הלכו לרב אלישיב, אומרת לו האישה, הרב, 8 ילדים, ואחת ירדה מהדרך, מה אני עושה? לזרוק מהבית. היא אומרת ככה, הרבנית אומרת לי, עכשיו תקשיב, רבי אורי, במו אוזניי שמעתי ובמו עיניי ראיתי את פיו הקדוש ממלל. ככה אמר לי יושב, את כל 8 ילדים שלך תפזרי בכל המשפחה שלך, ואת הילדה הזאת תשאירי בבית ותעזרי לה. שמעתם? את כל, זה לבן, זה לאח, זה לכולם, ואותה תשאירי, ובת תטפלי. שמעתם זה כבר כמה שנים. כן, אני מבין את ההורים, זה קשה מאוד לעמוד בזה. כל הממוסדות הדתית שלי, כל החרדיות שלי, וכל השכונה, וכל החברה, וכל הבגדים, הכל מתנגד. ומה, אני אקבל אותו ככה, והוא יגיע לי ככה, ומה הוא עושה בחדר שלו, ואני לא רוצה אפילו לפרט רבותיי. מה הוא רואה ומה הוא שומע ומה הוא עושה. אז ברוך שכיוונו, וברוך שאנחנו פועלים בכיוון הזה.
Okay, just one more.
The world is reeling from the loss of Reb Gershon Edelstein. We know one area that Reb Gershon was very, very, very strong about, was keeping children who are straying from the path at home, keeping them close, accepting them for who they are. I want to share two tiny little stories, but two amazing stories. Number one, a fellow came to Reb Gershon to talk to him about a struggle that he was having with his daughter, who had walked away from the path of Shmiras HaTorah v'HaMitzvahs. She wasn't keeping. And he said, I can't have that daughter in my house. She's going to negatively impact the rest of the children, but I don't want to totally kick her out. So I rented a small apartment, a building or two away, that she could live there. She can come to the house whenever she wants, but she can't stay in my house. And Gershon said, but the rest of the kids are okay? And I says, yeah, the rest of the kids are okay. It's just one. Gershon says, excellent idea. Take all the rest of your kids and put them into that rented apartment and keep your daughter in your home. That's a gadol's perspective. A second story. There was a young boy, when he was 9 or 10 years old, he already started smoking. And one day, his father caught him smoking. The father was so angry that he has a 10-year-old kid that's smoking that he kicked him out of the house and he says, don't ever bother coming back. The poor boy left the house in tears and he wandered around downstairs and he met a friend of his and he was crying and the friend said, what's wrong? He couldn't tell him, just I can't go back to the house, I need the bathroom. So he told him, not far away, there's a shul, go to the bathroom in the shul. The boy went to the bathroom in the shul and then he had nowhere to go. He sat down and he learned Mishnayos and he was sitting there crying while he was learning Mishnayos. An elderly gentleman walks by and sees a young boy crying. He puts his arm around him and he says, what's wrong? And first the boy doesn't want to say, but then the boy says, my father kicked me out of the house because he caught me smoking. Come, the elderly fellow said, come with me. Let's talk to your father. He took the boy by the hand and they walked up to the third floor on Rechav Tessler where the family lived and he knocked on the door. The father opens the door and he's shocked. Standing there is his son, who he's kind of angry to see, but standing next to him is the Gadol Hadar, the Rosh Hashiva Reb Gershon. Reb Gershon says, what happened? I met your son sitting in shul learning and crying. What happened? And the father gets very angry. He goes, I caught him with cigarettes. He can't come back into this house. Reb Gershon said to him, I want you to know something. I found him in shul sitting and learning. He's not a bad child. He's a good child. The father says, but what about the cigarettes? He says, the fact that a 10-year-old child smokes doesn't show anything wrong with the child. It shows something wrong with the father. Try to understand that, and maybe you'll bring your child back home, which eventually he did. That was Reb Gershon. There was no neshama, there was no child in Klal Yisrael that was left behind. It was the kirva, it was the love that a parent has to give to a child, regardless of who they are, which clearly is manifest in the incredible Allah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had for the Gadol Reb Gershon, like Pasuk Puim Megirsa. He never stopped learning, but he never stopped living the learning that he had. Tehei nishmas Yitzrua b'tzrach chaim.
Okay, now, there's a reason I showed these clips. Most of us, I think, have seen the Orizah, the Hesal Livracha, that clip. And the Reb Gershon clip, I'd like to annotate just one nekuda, that the fact that he said that the kid is smoking shows something about the father. I'd like to take that out too. And the fact he kicked him out of the house maybe showed something about the father. But the point is like this. I never spoke to either of Eliashiv or of Gershon about this particular inyan, but it's clear that they understood b'chachmasam. It's impossible to believe that the Gedolei Hador did not understand that when we put our priority on a struggling child, it's impossible and inconceivable that they thought there would be no impact on the other siblings. We're dealing with the chachamim of our generation, the greatest, wisest people we had. And I can tell you definitively, I have heard this from so many other Rabbanim and Poskim and Gedolim. Of course they knew there was an impact. The clips are to give us musagim that our priority, even though there's going to be some sort of impact. Of course, Rav Elyashiv understood that if you take all the kids and give them all out to everybody else, that you're going to hurt their attachments, they're going to feel abandoned. It's Pashut he understood that. When we watch these clips, we have to understand they're litem musogim, they're to give us concepts and ideas. And the concept and idea I took from this is that even though there's of course going to be an impact on the other children, your priority, our priority, is this struggling child. See, the fact is, crisis chinuch approach, as you've heard from me time and time again, evolves and is captured best by this concept of the happiness pleasure paradigm. I spoke about it yesterday. That as the kids go off, they're pushed off because of their hurt and pain inside. So of course they need to fill the hole in the heart with pleasure activities in order not to want to die. So they fill themselves up with stuff that's both analgesic and distracting. And then we catch them. We always catch them. And typically when we catch them, we react very poorly, very angrily at first, till we've learned this sugya, of course. And then eventually, of course, the hole gets bigger. They do worse things. We catch them again. Again, we destroy our attachment with them. And we know how fast that can happen till any of us began to learn the crisis chinuch approach. What is the crisis chinuch approach? The approach we know is define me more than I can love you. You define me. You do what you need to do to fill that hole in your heart, and you're going to discover that I have compassion, understanding, sensitivity, attunement to why you're doing it. And on the contrary, the more you do it, the more I love you, the more I care for you, the more I express my love for you, the more I act loving towards you. And so slowly but surely, the healing occurs. It's, as I've said many times, in crisis chinuch, we heal our children better through their defiance than through their compliance. This is a klal gadol. We heal our children better through their defiance than through their compliance. Because when they comply, they're holding back. They're burying their pain and their hurt. It's not until it comes out and we see that defiance, we see the behavior, the clothing, the drug use, the music they listen to, the attitudes, the lack of Shmir Shabbos, the McDonald's sandwich left strategically in your kitchen. It's when we see that stuff and we reach deeply into the behaviors and attitudes of our children, that's the only time the healing can happen. And of course, that will expose the other children to hanhagas and behaviors that are not consistent with the values of our home, and not consistent with Torah values. Frequently, they're not consistent with the norms of common sense, how to bring up children, decency and morality. They're not consistent with completely secular morality. And absolutely, there's going to be an impact on our children. And the Gedolei Yisrael understood that. I just think it's massively naive for anyone to believe that these great Gedolim, when they said these psakim, send the other kids out, and to get the other apartment for the rest of the kids, that these Gedolei Yisrael did not understand the impact this was going to have on the other siblings. That's what I take out of those videos. And I feel it's really crucial for us to understand that. I have heard it directly from Rabbanim and Gedolim during my career. But I bring that to you, the Mishmaya Koradfele. That from Shemayim, this is happening, and that our priority is saving this life, the one in front of us, even if there's an impact on the others. This is crucial, and I believe is the Hashkafas HaTorah as handed down to us by our Gedolim. Question is, how do we handle that? See, once upon a time, there was a world, I've heard this too, people have written to me and argued with me. There was a world where children married out and the Gedolei Yisrael passed and you sit Shiva on them. There was a world once upon a time. There was a world where Teichacha were hitting children to make them comply was normal. Which is why I often say that the brilliance of the insight that yesterday's discipline is today's abuse, that insight is so true. There was a world like that. But we have to do what's matim to our world, not the world of the past. We no longer sit shiva on children who marry out, nor should we. On the contrary, we try to be makarev them. We try to remain connected to them. Who knows what's going to be down the line, 10, 20, 30 years from now? Who knows what's going to happen? So the Ruach HaChamim is we stay close with them. We find a way to maintain a kesher with them. And each circumstance is different, how we do that. There was a world once upon a time of Leman Yiru V'Yishmo, where children should see that we react stark when someone steps out of line, because Leman Yiru V'Yishmo, they should see and hear that the swift justice that's meted out to anyone who's non-compliant. And for most part, that world is gone. Rabbi say that world is gone. We have to realize that no one learns from that. Actually, they learn fear. They learn to disconnect. They learn not to trust you. That world is over. And it's really crucial for us to understand that we have to deal with our world. The fact is, the world of children, I'm talking about the entire secular world, that world of children has changed. The way children are, for example, chutzpah. Once upon a time, it was chutzpahdik to disagree with your parents. And you got your mouth washed out. When we were kids, you got some soap, you put your tongue out, and your mother rubbed soap into your tongue, and you had to take it back in your mouth, and you had to sit with that if you said something not nice. Who in their right mind today would dream of doing such a thing? The fact that I think someone just said you'd be arrested, that's probably true. The way we were brought up 50, 60 years ago, if anyone would experience the discipline we experienced as children, you would go to jail today. So that we have to attune what we're doing with our children to the norms of this society, the norms of the world they live in, the norms of our generation. So I'm not saying there's no makom for tochacha, but we have to change tochacha completely. Where tochacha, we connect to the word tochacha, not to do with whacking, but to the word lochiach, to prove, to show, to help them internalize and see. The world has changed. And if we keep attaching ourselves to norms that rarely apply in our world, we will hurt more and more children and drive more and more kids away. So the question is, what do we do? So I'm going to talk about an assumption. This assumption is that whoever's listening to this is that you have a child already in your home who, due to whatever traumatic experiences they had, which you may not even know what it is yet, but they've reacted to the point where you had no choice but to shift your relationship to your child to the world of crisis chinuch. And remember, in crisis chinuch, the yesod is that we look at the defiance as an opportunity for healing by attuning to their defiant behavior, be it in sneas, be it in Shmir Shabbos, be it in Tarfus, be it in relationships. We attune to the fact that they need that, not because it's merida, it's not rebellion, it's an attempt to heal. Just like any child who smokes pot on their journey, when they smoke marijuana, are looking to heal from their pain. They're not doing it because it's cool. They're doing it because they're hurting. And if indeed a child was just doing it because they're cool, if you would know that for sure 100%, it would have a different approach. But the assumption we have is they're hurting. And you've shifted your family, your environment around your home, which the younger kids, if it's an oldest, as we had with our oldest, all the other kids were going to observe and watch as we tolerated levels of sneers in the home that were astonishing in those early days to us, to have to tolerate. Behaviors, Chilul Shabbos, smoking, who knows what they were doing at young ages, whatever they were doing. As we tolerated that, other kids saw. So this is the subject. We have in principle two homes. I want to say very clearly, if you have a home where your parenting was attuned, if you've heard me speak about the crisis chinuch, in that drasha where I talk about the principles of attunement, let's just take the attachment of safe, secure, seen, and soothed. If you were doing that, you and your spouse from day one, this is the kind of home you've run, always. This is actually why when we wrote the book, we made such a fuss about it, because it was the hope that the next generation, our children getting married, would be gifted with this book, gifted with this knowledge, so that as they bring up their children, they'll understand how to create resilience. And if indeed you had such a thing, where this is how you run your home. You've got the 4 S's perfectly down pat. By the way, everyone like that who does that, you could leave now. But in such a home, where you love them so unconditionally, both spouses, and you've done safe, secure, and seen and soothed, even if someone goes through trauma, chances are the trauma will be shallow, the impact will be shallow, the impact on the other kids will be relatively minimal. But even in such a home, the other siblings will need some level of attunement, as I'm going to describe. Don't fool yourself. Even if you were zeicha to run such a home, and temporarily to help a child who's struggling with trauma, you need to make accommodations in your home. Even in such a home, there will still be some impact on the children. Always. It's not that the resilience you provided will not impact their souls and their hearts when they see you change the ruach of your home. It is confusing, even in such a home. What we're going to be talking about is the regular home. Homes where one or both of us as parents can't really do that. We didn't really offer fully the 4 S's in the first place. Where we're struggling now because we have a child who's gone through trauma, and we're fully aware there is an impact of some sort on the other children. This is the subject we're going to deal with. So let me divide it up for you and make clear something we spoke about this morning that I'd like to go on record and make this very, very clear. Someone asked this morning that it would appear, actually I don't even remember how they asked it exactly, but they used the word contagious. That somehow it's contagious. One kid goes off and struggles. We do crisis chinuch, and it seems to make it contagious. Good, I'm seeing heads nodding, so I'm feeling good. It appears to make it contagious, where other kids suddenly go off, and then all the self-criticism, the self-blame, other people, especially family, that means brothers and sisters-in-law, parents, that's the grandparents, who come and say, Hashem Yirachem, how could you do this? Look at the impact on your other children. Look what's happening. And they come and criticize us. And in that moment, we who were always anyway besophic, maybe I'm doing the wrong thing, because crisis chinuch is so counterintuitive. When they start criticizing us about the contagion in our home, we can fall for it and believe it. So I want to make something clear once and for all. If you have other children in your family who have latent, pre-existing, buried traumas, whether from learning trauma or sexual trauma or de facto traumas, other forms of trauma, they have serious struggles of their own that are latent and buried and haven't yet emerged, then when you shift to crisis chinuch with one child, an older child, you will activate in the younger children the early expression of their latent trauma. It will be activated. So it wasn't that when you did crisis chinuch, there's a causal effect. It caused it. And I know there are critics out there in the world who, when they hear me speak on this, they jump up in arms and write letters to Mishpacha and Ami against me, where they say it is causal, you did cause it, and it's not true. None of them, by the way, not one of the critics, I'll say this so very openly, have ever sat down with me and said, I want to understand what it is you're saying. Can I work it through with you and try and understand it? I feel differently. I think you're wrong. I would welcome them. But people write and say and critique without ever actually sitting down with me and saying, can you help me understand fully? Can we spend a few hours, which I would gladly do, trying to understand your data? How do you come to your conclusions? Where's the research? I would gladly share it all. And not one ever has. Not one. So when you read stuff about people saying, I disagree, I've seen people who write, and I'm not upset about it, I'm saying this for your benefit. When people write stuff and say, I disagree with Rabbi Russell's position on X, Y, or Z. So I'd love to know, and you should ask yourself or ask them, how many times have you called him to discuss it with him? Have you ever fully understood what it is he's saying and why? I'm saying this to you because it's very confusing when you listen in the world to this like ping pong match out there in the world of so-called experts. I invite anyone to come and ask me and sit down with me and spend hours with me to process, and we'll work it through and I'll show them why. And my experience is that as I talk this through with almost anyone, the penny drops and they understand why this works and nothing else does. Having other children in your home with pre-existing latent problems, issues, or traumas of any sort, problems that make their normative journey through life in the yeshiva system, in the Chassidish world, it makes it impossible for them. And it's latent. When your child starts struggling, it will expose itself. It's inevitable. That is not what do we say, contagious? That's not causality. That's early exposure. And now I want to say something even more dramatic. Early exposure is good, not bad. We, unfortunately, spend so much time desperately trying to protect our children, and no one ever told us, and we didn't come to terms with the fact that late onset, when they break late in life, the later they break, the harder it is to help them. Because later in life, they turn it into a philosophy. Later in life, they make it into a shita. And it's very, very difficult to change their minds later on. I'm not saying impossible. I'm saying very difficult. Early exposure, where they get exposed because they had a latent issue and it came out in your family because you shifted for an older child to crisis chinuch model, actually turns out to be a bracha. Can we just drink that in for a moment? Now, when I say a bracha, I don't expect everyone to jump up for joy. Say, great, I got 4 kids off the derech now. This is like amazing. No. When I say it's a bracha, and I discussed this with Gedolei Yisrael, that when the kids go off early, as a matter of fact, I don't want to say names now publicly, but there were those who were saying to me with a wink and a nod, so maybe we should be pushing them all off early. Because when they go off early, they get exposed to all the well-meaning, amazing people on the streets with the programs and the yeshivas and this, all the stuff and the mentors and all these wonderful heilige neshamas who are out there connecting with them and helping them, and they get help for their traumas earlier in life. They get the support of us lovingly and caringly for them earlier in life, and typically, and not uncommonly, such a high percentage of them will return later on almost spontaneously. As they go through the system, they come towards the age of getting married, they settle down and they do well. Ad kadei kach, I'm telling you, in sort of jokingly behind closed doors, I've discussed this with Rabbanim, we've all pondered the idea of pushing them all off early. This idea of contagion, this idea that somehow when you start doing crisis chinuch, it will cause other children to go off is not true. It's simply not true. But it will activate latent struggles, internal issues that need to come out, need to be faced, and in the long run, that's a bracha, not a klala. I hope I'm very, very clear about that. Now the question is like this, which is really the discussion that I want to discuss today. What do we do? How do we approach the other siblings? How do we support them? That's the ones without a pre-existing problem. They don't have latent traumas, latent issues. As a matter of fact, they're regular, more or less fine kids who are growing up in the more or less fine environment wherever you live, and they're more or less doing fine in school with more or less normal parents. We're talking about that. We are, by the way, more or less normal. Okay, let's just okay. We have to have a button for the next conference. Keshe Nafshi, more or less normal parents. That's us. So the first thing you have to know about the other kids, the first thing you need to know about the other children, these ones who do not have an underlying issue, they are going to be exposed, they are going to be hurt, they are going to be struggling. Every single one of them, one way or another, will be challenged by the fact that we're turned to crisis chinuch. And we have to accept that's part of our responsibility of crisis chinuch is not just the primary kid who's in crisis, but it's now everybody in the home. We have to be sensitive to everybody else. They need our attunement. Attunement really means that we're going to pay attention deeply to try and understand where they're hurting, what the struggles are for them, how they're dealing with it, how they're living their own lives around all this craziness. Because frequently, those of us in the midst of doing crisis chinuch, in the midst of that, we have crazy homes. Let's be real. We have a home that's shifted away frequently from the values that we would like to do. Even if we as parents maintain, as we should, consistently our own core values, hanhagas, and life for ourselves, we must maintain that. Being cool with kids doesn't help. We have to maintain our standards and values authentically and be, in fact, more authentic as frum Jews for who we are, while at the same time we open up the gates to acceptance of the behaviors that are designed to save their life. Think of it the way I do. Crisis chinuch, the things they're doing are life-saving. Their need is to save their life. And we should look at it as heroic that they're doing these hanhagas. It's medicine to them. And if we have to give poison to save someone's life, we all do that. As we know that every single person who takes medication, everyone knows that every single pill you ever take has poison in it. Haraya, if you take too many, you die. But we take it thoughtfully. We take it under a doctor's prescription. We take it in the right way, with food, without, with water. We take that poison willingly and gladly because we know we need that medicine to save our lives. Crisis chinuch is no different. So what do we do? First of all, we have to attune to our children. Now, attunement means this. It means that we have to genuinely and completely convey we're talking now about the siblings without pre-existing issues, because for the rest of them with pre-existing issues, they're going to go right into crisis chinuch early and prematurely, so I'm not addressing them now. We go slowly as we allow them to move into that area. What do we do with the rest of them? The first thing is we attune. We tune in. Tune in means that we really connect with them, that this must be hard for you. We have to sit down with them and let them know, I realize this must be really hard for you. That means we connect with them, our eye contact, our body language, our tone of voice, and we frequently do it. Not just once, but we frequently go back to it. Every time there's an episode in the house and someone storms out with a curse word, on their lips, which they just cursed you out, or they mechal Shabbos and storm out of the house, being mechal Shabbos, the first thing we do is turn to the other children. How was that for you? It was hard for us. How was that for you? We have to tune in to their experience of how horribly difficult this is around them. Not just try to get back to life. They've left, so let's go on with Zmiris. Let's sing Zmiris. How you say to your husband, quick, sing Zmiris. As if somehow we're just going to move on. Quick, make Kiddush. After this daughter came down dressed like who knows what, made a whole scene about how she doesn't care and give a certain type of interest in your life with various curse words, as you're all about to make Kiddush, and then storms out the house, and then the wife turns to the husband and says, quick, make Kiddush, quick. That's crazy. That's crazy. First, put down the kais and say to the kids, I'm guessing that was unbearable. It was for us. How do you feel about it? Attunement means the first thing is when there's an episode and the person involved in the episode has left the stage. Oh, stage left, right? They left the stage. When they're gone and out the house and stormed off, you turn empathetically to the children and say, how was that for you? It was pretty unbearable for us. How you feeling? You don't say, quick, make it. Quick, through us. Quick. Let's normal. Let's do normal. Quick, normal. There's nothing normal anymore about your life when you're doing crisis chinuch. Can we accept that? Is that a good soundbite to send out? There's nothing normal anymore about your life when you're doing crisis chinuch. The new norm is a much greater norm. It's a much more spiritual norm. It's a much closer to Ribono Shel Olam. It's a much higher level norm, but it's not the old norm. That norm is over. So don't try to keep that norm going without first, how did that feel to you? How are you doing with that? Would you like to talk about it? They'll frequently say no. I'm not saying you turn a group therapy session on, where we're all going to be forced to share. Hi, I'm Rabbi Russell, I'm an addict, this is how I feel. Mostly, it's fascinating when we talk, my wife and I actually had a long conversation with siblings at one of the previous conferences. And one of the things they told us was they want to be asked that question, but they also don't want to answer. Isn't that interesting? They desperately want you to ask that question, how you doing? How was that for you? But they desperately don't want you to expect them to answer that question. Can we understand that? It would be a nightmare for them to talk about it. But it's a worse nightmare if we didn't ask. So the delicate dance we do with them at that moment is where we tune in to ask without the expectation or need or responsibility to answer. If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to. If you don't, that's fine too. I just want you to know I care about how you feel. That must have been really hard to witness. That's attunement. This is crucial that we communicate this to our children. And they feel that we care about their feelings. Now, I'm going to go through a list now of things, direct things teenagers, siblings told me. This is almost word for word from things I asked them, I met with a number of teenagers who have siblings in crisis. And I asked them, what would you like me to say? And the list I'm about to go through came from them. Someone could actually, I wish I'd had a PowerPoint, I would have put it up there, but maybe you could take notes of each one of these and we can send it out afterwards. So here's the list. Number 1, here's things they want us to ask them how they feel about. Number 1 on the list, the changes in our home. They grew up with a certain type of home, with certain types of expectations, where a Shabbos Suda looked normal, or Yontef looked normal. There was a certain norm and expectation of clothing, of dress code, of conduct and behavior, and a certain level of respect to parents. When the kids are very little, they usually grant us that. And some of the kids are used to that and expect that, and they deeply mourn the loss of that. They would like us to acknowledge how painful it is to them, the fact that there have been really profound changes in their home, and they're not sure, what is this home? What are our values here? They're kids after all. They would like us to acknowledge that, tune into that, ask them about it. How do you feel about it? Let them express their fears and concerns. Like, are we all going off the derech? Like, what's next? I've had kids who've asked their mother, are you going to start dressing like her? Like just to make her feel good? Is that it? They're concerned and worried about our environment. So the first is ask them. Be attuned. They want to know what's happening to our home. Who are we? What are we doing? And according to the age and level and maturity of the child, we need to talk to them about it. Some of the parents have told me they've watched with their older kids some of these videos from KN-10, and they were tremendously helpful to the kids to understand where we're holding. So with older children, you can do that. But at least to acknowledge our home isn't the same. It's true. And there's a reason for it. And there's a reason why we're allowing this. Explain it to them. This list, by the way, was pretty much in order of what I received. I tried to organize it based on what I heard from various kids. Number 2 on the list was they found their parents are frequently not present. Truth is, for us, parents, we have to know that when we're dealing with crisis chinuch, when you have a child who is in your home rebelling and struggling and already, way away from our values, you are probably a trauma victim too. And frequently, we are offline too. We're not present. We're not there. We are frequently so worried and engaged. How many times any of you have found yourself for hours locked in your bedroom or the bathroom, making frantic phone calls quietly because you've got to deal with some crisis somewhere with your child, and you're not present, and the kids are knocking on the door. Mommy, Tati, when are you coming out? Where are you coming out? We are both physically not present frequently, and we're emotionally and psychologically not present frequently. We have to, and then of course there's the frequent traveling and going and coming when they're out in a yeshiva or they're somewhere out of town, and we're always doing the right thing, which is to travel and go and spend time with them and connect with them, which we must do. And at the same time, we need to acknowledge to the other siblings, how is it for you when I'm not present? What can we do about helping that? Would a phone call help? Would a texting help? What would help you deal with the fact that I'm frequently, emotionally, psychologically, and physically not present? I'm not here. And again, I want to tell you what most of the kids told me, that they have no answer for that. But they just want it to be acknowledged. In fact, this whole list, almost all the things on the list, have no real answer. In other words, we can fine-tune our own ability to be present. We can recognize how distracted we get with the crisis, with the problem, and with the phone calls. And our whole involvement and engagement can be so disconnected because we're so focused on the crisis. What the kids told me is what they need desperately for us is to admit that. To admit it to them, to acknowledge it to them, to understand how hard that must be for them, but not just to trivialize as if you're doing fine. Let me use my kochos over here. That makes the kids crazy. They know we probably don't have an answer. They know that we're probably doing the exact right thing, which we should be doing, which is taking care of their struggling sibling. They know it. But they need us to acknowledge how frequently we are not present. To deny that is exceedingly hurtful. We are not present. We are ourselves trauma victims. After an episode in our home, most of us can go offline like nothing. We will ourselves shut down, close up. We won't be our normal, friendly, happy, bubbly self. And our kids lament the loss of who we are. They miss us. And what they miss the most is our denial of that process. So let's acknowledge it. Let's connect with it and help them understand. I understand it's happening frequently and it must be hard for you. One of the very biggest was the fact that they witness privileges, rights, concessions, our liberal approach to the child in crisis, which they do not have. Again, I'm talking about the kids who are not the ones with latent trauma, because the ones with latent trauma, believe me, you'll be moving quickly to allow those same privileges to them. But here you are with a young family, and in their naivety and immaturity, they feel cheated. They feel cheated that you're running off on exotic vacations, that you're providing tablets and smartphones, that there's a screen suddenly in this one's bedroom on the wall, a massive 108-inch screen on the wall. And what about me? I want that too. Now, if we really speak to them, as I've spoken to them, not in their wildest dreams do they think that you ought to be putting a 108-inch screen on their wall in their bedroom. And in fact, if you would even offer it, they think you're crazy. They think you're crazy. What bothers them is it appears that we all have somewhat limited resources, and most of those resources seem to be going to one person. Again, this is amazing, but I ask the kids, do you expect equality, that you need to get the same as they're getting? And the kids say no. I say, so what do you expect of your parents? Number one, we expect of our parents to understand how hard it is for us to witness that. That's number one. Can we just tune in how difficult that must be and acknowledge it and not be afraid that if we acknowledge and validate how difficult it is for them, that they will then demand, well, if you know how difficult it is for me, then get me one too. That's not where they're at. Where they're at is struggling because all people, all children, we as adults, we all crave a little more in the Gashmi world. That's normal. Every person wants that. But when we give these privileges to the struggling kid, as we know, the other kids will think in their hearts, and we need to validate that thought, which is, do I have to go off the derech for you to give it to me too? Do I have to stop keeping Shabbos so you'll give me a smartphone? Do I have to rebel so you allow me to wear whatever I want? We have to tune in to the fact why we're giving the privileges, what they're about, and then, of course, do everything we can with our limited resources to give appropriate privileges to these children, too. Whatever we can do to give them extras. Not the same. It doesn't have to be the tablet. It doesn't have to be a smartphone. It probably shouldn't be. But we have to find something to give them to sort of acknowledge. It's not, please get this right, the kids they're not stupid kids. They understand what we're doing. But we have to find a way not to equalize, we have to add up the sum value of everything we spent over here and make sure we spend it over. That's not it at all. That's not what they need or nor what they ask for. It's not the value they're looking for to equalize it. They're looking to be acknowledged. They're looking to be understood. It's difficult. And while we do, and we should, grant them gifts. I often talk about how I believe prizes in chinuch are not helpful. Surprises are very helpful. The unexpected. So that when you go somewhere, by the way, Rabbi Sai, this works for your wife very well too. Just don't tell them, but it works real well. Just don't mention I said anything. Surprises. Little gifts. You go somewhere, you see something and you remember the non-struggling, the regular siblings, and you bring them home a little something. It costs nothing. But it's the fact that you tuned in and you got them something special, something they would like. You gave them something attuned, a privilege in a certain way, an extra. That's what they're really after. So if you don't do it, I must tell you, it sounds like they want the same. Their hurt feelings, when they get expressed, sound like they're demanding the same. But in fact, if we were to focus on understanding how challenging, how difficult it is for them to watch these resources and privileges and permissions and liberalism be handed out here, and we still have a strict, curfew and homework and tznius and learning and expectations for shacharis. The attunement, that's what attunement is. The attunement to acknowledging that to them, helping them understand that we get it, how hard that is, coupled with the little gifts, the little things we do for them, the unexpected privileges that show them you're on my mind too, helps them deal with this problem, with this inequality. We have to acknowledge it, but we don't have to equalize it. It's a mistake. They're not stupid, the kids. I have to tell you, when I spoke to the kids, when we spoke to my right, we were so impressed, amazed at their maturity, their sincerity, and incredibly, their understanding of us as parents. Amazingly so, how they deeply, this is what we got from them. And I've had this all the time when I talk to them. How, in fact, my wife and I, over the years, we in Eretz Yisrael, we frequently have groups, either yeshiva guys or seminary students, learning there. And we have them over for Shabbos, and Shabbos turns into a whole, you can imagine at the Russells what it looks like, a whole Shabbaton thing that goes on. And every conversation comes up, especially children in crisis. It always comes up. Always, always, always. The kids bring it up because turns out they always have a sibling or a first cousin or the next door neighbor who's gone off the deck and they want to understand. And we talk to them about how it felt to them. And I can tell you, the kids do not expect you to give the same privileges. They're not stupid. They understand this is for them because of their circumstance. What they're really saying to you is, I want to be acknowledged. I want to be understood. Please tune in how hard that is for me. Nevertheless. And the attunement coupled with the frequent, I thought of you, I was out, I was at the store, and I bought you something, or I was on a trip and I thought of something, or I'm going on a trip and I'd love you to come with me. How about you come with me? It'll be such a nice time we'll have together. The attunement to that will take care of that problem. Here's another one that they're very troubled about, again, and it demands our attention. When the sibling is incredibly disrespectful to you as a parent, curses you out, ignores you, lies to you, screams at you, intimidates you, threatens you, and there's a whole scene where the siblings have to witness this incredible lack of respect for you. Interestingly enough, they feel bad for you. They feel really bad for us. It's not just that the ruach of the home, I said at the beginning, has changed, but they feel really bad for us. It really hurts them. And so we need to talk to them about our feelings about that disrespect. What I would say, and again, this is predicated on having a good, close relationship with your children, is I want you to know that I don't experience that as disrespect. By the way, if this is not true for you, don't say it because they'll know it's not true. You have to get yourself to a place where you understand that all you're looking at is a lion with a thorn in its foot and it hurts like crazy. That is not chutzpah or disrespect. That's an external expression of pain. And so we must tell our children, the other ones, that's not disrespect. That's pain. Just like all anger is externalized pain, it's internal pain that gets expressed externally is anger. In the same way, our children's disrespect of us is an expression of their pain. We should get ourselves, halavai, to a place where we feel that and see that. And when they've left the scene after disrespecting us, we can acknowledge that was probably hard for you to witness, that disrespect. And they'll say, yes, it was. And then you tell them, I want you to know I didn't experience disrespect. I experienced pain. And it makes me want to cry. I hurt for your sibling. We need to talk to them about how the neighborhood friends are not coming over to the house anymore, because many of their parents have told them, not by the Cohens. Not the Cohens. They can come to your house. No, they can come here. You can invite her here, but you can't go there. And so the siblings feel their world shrinks, where they can't bring kids to their home. Equally, they are utterly mortified when their friends do come to their house just in time to witness their sister or brother in a very compromised religious state, shall we say. They're mortified. We need to tune into that. That must be hard for you. How does that feel? We have to find time. We used to have in our home family meetings. At the end of the day, it was for many years we did it. At the end of the day, when I finished all my work, I would take a shower, get into my pajamas and a robe, go down into the living room, at a recliner. I'm British, so I poured myself a little glass of whiskey, and I would sit there and say to the kids, schmooze time. Family time. Let's schmooze. And that's when we processed these feelings. Their struggles with what was going on in our family, how it felt, what it looked like. And we would allow them to vent and talk and express and emote. It was family time. And I would sit there, dafka, in my pajamas and robe with that little whiskey to give them the message, I got all the time in the world. I'm finished. My day is over. No phone. I'm done. I'm here to schmooze. I'm here to listen. So we need to tune in and find time to tune in about what happens with their friends and how embarrassing it is to them, especially the younger ones, when their friends come and they witness and they see what's going on. They need our attunement. We can't stop it, but they need us to acknowledge that. Again, when the child has left, not that we expect them to talk about it. Most kids don't. Occasionally, by the way, upper teenage girls do. They don't stop talking about it, actually. But boys, for sure, if you ask a teenage boy anything, you're lucky if you get one syllable as a response. That's 10 minutes. Well, you're lucky if you get one syllable. So we need to tune into that. Now, I would like to address a difficult subject very quickly. What do you do if your teenage, very yeshivisha or chasidisha son tells you, I'm having a lot of problems, I can't come home the way his sister is dressed. I find it's provocative. She and her friends hang around the home dressed in a way I can't stand it. It's giving me hirhurim. I can't be around it. What do I do? This is a very common problem, which we have to talk to our sons about. If you have a son who is in that matzav, ask him, how do you feel about it? You'll be surprised. They become like teenage girls and they will tell you all their problems. Because it's a real challenge for a mid-teenage bacha, who's still in the program and doing well and trying to do well, being around his sister and her friends if they're not dressed in a sneer sticker fashion. It's a serious problem. We have to talk to them about it. be mechazik them. We have to help them embrace our hashkafas about this. The mishmaya karat filei. This problem is a min hashamayim problem. When I talk to teenage boys, by the way, about problems with taivas, the normal problems with midsei yesod, these inyanim. So one of the things I tell the boys, they find it amazing, is I tell them something I learned from Meir Rebbe from Mashgiach, Shlita from Matzio. I once asked him, what is the role of taivas? I don't get it. The whole midas yesod business. If it's there to provide kiyum amin, an ahava to isha, if that's what it's for, just kiyum amin. So even if you have 13, 12, 11 kids, taivas escort a person through the whole life. Millions of times he's struggling with taivas. How does that make sense? The cheshbon. If it's for kiyum amin, how does that work? And why b'chlal do boys get taivas anyway before they get married? Puberty should happen, shmonai selechupa. 18, 19, they should go through puberty. Well, they go through puberty at 13 for. With all the struggles. And afterwards, the whole thing makes no sense. So Meir Rebbe told me an amazing thing. He said, it's true that taivas is, and the whole midsei yesod, all these inyanim, are for kiyum amin, and for ava to anisha, that's true. But he said they have a whole different tachlis. I never heard this. When he told it to me, I'd never heard it before. I call it the seesaw effect. This is what he taught me. And I've taught this to many teenage boys who love this approach. And what he said was this. He said, the taivas is like, yetzer is really one thing. It goes in two directions. Yetzer tov, yetzer ra. It's like a seesaw. It goes up and down. Kosher godel mi chaver, yetzer god mimenu. There's a bigger yetzer, but it's always got a middle point where it goes up and down. He said, when the taiva is out of control, they're too far up, fighting with taivas fails. Just gets you more confused. Doesn't work. He says, the tachlis of it, he says, is that when the taivas are high, it means there's an area down here in your avodas Hashem that needs chizuk. It's a gift. It's a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It means there's something that needs chizuk. And then when you push that up, you find something to work on, you discover it goes down. And then it comes back again, days or weeks later. And it seems out of control. And you look down here, not up here. You look down here for something to be mechazik, some piece of your avodas Hashem to be mechazik, and you push it up. And the taivas go down. And then a few weeks later, you discover it's out of control again. And instead of being sabrachan about it, you realize it's a gift. Because there's something you need to work on. In your avodas Hashem, it could be in davening, in tefillah, kedusha, in something. And you push it up, the taivas go down. Zok the Mashgiach says this seesaw is life. That's why a boy gets it at bar mitzvah. Because a bar mitzvah is chayiv in mitzvahs. And its primary job is to help him with mitzvahs, with avodas Hashem. This reframe for a sincere teenage boy, I found some of them, when I explain it to them deeply, they cry. They ask me, why was I never told this? Why was I never told this? As a matter of fact, when Mashgiach first told me this, we were on the corner of 9th and Madison in Lakewood, walking back from the alumni after he spoke. I arranged for him to speak there. Every Shabbos Mevarchim for about 13 years, I had the schus to escort the Mashgiach, Meir Rebbe, to the alumni from his house and bring him home. We made Kiddush every Shabbos Mevarchim for about 13 years. One year, I asked him this question. We were at the corner of 9th and Forest. 9th and Forest. And he told me this. I grabbed him. I hugged him. I told him, how come I never knew this? No one ever told me this. But as I explained this to teenage boys, to a sincere teenage boy, it's like a marpel nefesh. It's unbelievable, the change. So we tell him, work on your shmiras einayim. Stay in yeshiva a little longer. See, the one thing you can't do is to go to your daughter, God forbid, and I say this, God forbid, you go to your daughter, God forbid, and tell her, it's very disturbing to your brother, the way you dress. You really need to tighten up. It's not fair. Don't do this. Don't do this. I'll tell you why. If, God forbid, that girl is a sexual abuse, actually, regardless, if she's rebelling against her, let's start with sexual abuse. She's a sexual abuse victim. And you now tell her that her body is an aggressor. Hashem Yirachem, the damage you can do to that girl who's already been abused. And now you're telling her she's an abuser because of religion. Religion tells us you are an abuser. God forbid, that could kill a kid. That could be the last straw in her life. God forbid you go to her and start telling her to tighten up her tznius. And I want to tell you, if a girl is rebelling against Torah mitzvahs because of learning or other problems, and it's not sexual abuse, and now we're telling her because of Torah, you've got to behave better, you could put her over the edge in a sofif kuch nefesh. Hashem Yirachem, don't do it, please. It's a very dangerous thing to do. The focus and attention is on the brother. Sensitivity, understanding, attunement, how difficult it is. Give him chizuk, give him eitzes. Stay a little longer in yeshiva if you can. What to do. Tell him what you do, how you handle it. And most of all, tell him this idea about the seesaw. The faked, you can turn this into something for your avodas Hashem that's unique and special. And it's true. We all say, Lo midufshech v'lo mi'uktzech. Don't give me your honey. Don't give me your sting. I'm Michael Tavis about my avodas Hashem. And we have to acknowledge that to him too. It's exceedingly hard for him. But don't tell your daughter to change. It could be real life-threatening. Please don't do it. Focus instead on him. Last couple of comments. Parentified child. Kids hate being parentified. You have this one little tzedekis. We made this mistake. We had one little tzedekis. Today she's got 5 children. She lives in Shalayim, Kanei Nahara. But we made that mistake in the early years, and we've talked to her about it, that we expected too much of her. We parentified her. We did stupid things like asking her for eitzes about how to handle the kids and what to do with them. It put responsibility on her that was horrendous, unfair. Don't parentify your children. Don't ask them to do your job as a parent. Don't expect them to be a role model. For heaven's sakes, do not tell them, you better dress properly because look, your youngest, they're looking at you. They're looking at you. That's not fair. Don't put that pressure on them. Let them be them. Forget. Tell them, Mishmaya karot filei. This is all min hashamayim that's happening. You do not have the responsibility to fix your siblings. And nor do you have the responsibility to be the perfect child so your parents can feel a little nachas. You have a responsibility to be you. Just be the best you can. It's our job, Mami and Tati. It's our job to take care of your siblings, to have this home run well. It is not your job. Tell them that. Because it's frequent that the little tzaddikus or the little tzaddik in your home take on this role for themselves. And it's an enormous pressure. It's a painful pressure to them that ultimately hurt them. Don't give advice to these siblings. Listen instead. What they asked for was attunement. What they asked for is that we should hear them. What they asked for is we should understand how difficult this is for them. That's all they asked for. They want us to be tuned in and not have expectations of them that they should be perfect. And the last thought is this: please don't panic. There's something called being a teenager. Your regular teenagers, the non-trauma victims amongst them, will go through likely teenage angst, the ups and downs of being a teenager. That's normal. Don't interpret when you see them struggling and panic stations. They're obviously going off the derech too, and suddenly react with the fire brigade and the police and the FBI to stop them, or they have to go to therapy right away. Remind yourself that teenagers are teenagers. And teenage boys don't talk, and teenage girls don't stop talking. Remind yourself that teenage girls fight with their mothers non-stop. It's what they do. It's why they'll have a good relationship when they finally get out of being teenagers. Teenage boys shut their fathers out, and which the fathers quite enjoy, unfortunately. I'm sorry. But they enjoy it. That's why when men hit their mid-40s, they're desperate for a relationship with their father to work out all their stuff before he dies. I want to work it all out. Girls have it done by 19. They screamed, they yelled, they fought, they reacted, and now they're best friends. They're like two sisters. It's crazy. Men, who's that? Oh, it's my son. It's my son? Yeah, it's my third son, right? They don't talk. Let your teenagers be teenagers. Don't think that when they're going through normal teenage stuff, if you're not sure, read a book on teenagers. Read a book about regular teenagers so that you can understand and not panic when they act like teenagers and think they're all going off the derech. That's one of the things the kids hate the most. Having said all this, this is Rosh Hashanah. You understand, as I said at the beginning, this is not detailed. This is Rosh Hashanah. I hope this is helpful. Will give you chizuk. We went through this with all our kids. We came out the other end, and we're close with all of them. I'll tell you one last thing. I'm not going to name names, but you could ask them yourself. But I can tell you how many amazing schools, yeshivas, programs, mentoring programs, therapists, people working with kids who are struggling. These programs are run by the siblings who survived. It's incredible how many of all the main programs are run by and staffed by the siblings who survived, who learned by watching their parents how they handled it so beautifully and helped them with it. They frequently learned how to cope with it and found their purpose and meaning in life. Mishmaya kodrov vele. If it's brought to our home, it's min hashamayim. So Eibishter helfen. I hope we all have chizuk and we can go home and attune to our siblings, our children. Thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.